take a look up there.
Reeks. Hey, what are you kids doing here?
You haven't by any chance seen a morphological being lurking around here?
Morphological being?
Yeah.
What the heck is that? Wait a second. Did it look something like this?
Ew, gross.
Too kind. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the galactically feared, globally reviled, universally despised. They call me Ivan Ooze.
Well, pack your bags, because we're sending you right back where you came from.
He, a teenager with a big mouth. Not much has changed in 6,000 years.
You obviously don't know who you're dealing with, Mr. Raisinhead.
Really?
Yeah, we're the Power Rangers.
Woo! Where's my autograph book? Ha! Power Rangers, huh? So, Zordon's still using a bunch of kids to do his dirty work. Well, meet my kids. From this moment forth, the world as you know it shall cease to exist. Welcome to my nightmare!
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine. We've got a new guest today. This is another guy here with me in Japan, and that's Liam Carrigan. Liam, how you doing today?
Hi, Perry. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So before we get started about today's movie, why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so yeah, my name's Liam. I'm originally from Glasgow in Scotland, but as of yesterday, it's been 15 years since I first moved to Japan.
Nice.
I've been in Hong Kong for a few years as well in the middle, and funnily enough, the movie that we're gonna talk about today inspired me to initially get into martial arts, which inspired me to get into kendo later on, which led to me taking my first trip to Japan back in 2005. So it's all kind of coming full circle today.
Nice. So your first trip, was that when you moved here, or did you come here on vacation first?
I came here as a university student. We
Okay.
did a kendo training camp for 2 weeks. 1 week in Tokyo, then 1 week up in Akita Prefecture with my sensei's sensei.
Oh, okay, cool.
And then from there, I just fell in love with the place. So a year later, when I graduated, I started looking for teaching jobs, and I got one. And so I've been kind of dividing my time since then between teaching and writing, because those are my two kind of skill sets.
Yeah, definitely know what that's like. So what kind of writing are you doing?
At the moment, I'm the news editor for Osaka.com, which is a kind of a news and features website focusing on everything that's in Osaka. Although I live in Nagano, I did live in Osaka for a number of years, so I know the city inside and out.
Okay.
And I occasionally write for Gaijin Pot. Not so much these days, but I do occasionally little bits for them. I sometimes blog about what folk from your country would call soccer, the football. I'm a big follower of Celtic Football Club. Ironically, our biggest rivals are called Rangers, considering what we're going to talk about today. But yeah, it's a mix. I like to keep myself busy, you know.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, my dad was from London, so I grew up very early on. I learned that soccer is only called soccer in the U.S. He made sure that I never forgot that.
Well, you know, Japan's a funny one like that, because in Japan, they say saka, which is
Right.
like their version of soccer. But if you look at the shirts the national team wear, it says JFA, Japan Football Association. So they're in two minds about that one, I think, you know?
Yeah. In fact, my daughter has someone bought her, and I think it was a hand-me-down outfit she has, and it's a JFA outfit. So yeah, I've noticed that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, and even when it comes to football, they don't call it football. They call it Ame football, right? They call it American football.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a strange one all around, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but today we are talking about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. This was the 1995 film that was based on the TV show, and this was an interesting little movie because it had the same actors from the TV show, but it's set in like a different universe. And so there's like it's the same actors, but you know, the villains are a little bit different. There's, you know, some of the villains, the usual villains from the TV show aren't there. And then we've got some replacements in there. The zords are all CGI in this one, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. And the costumes and all that were complete. The weapons, even the command center, all of it was like completely different from, even like small things like Ernie's was completely different from what it was in the TV show.
Yeah. So I mean, the interesting thing about that is you can instantly tell it was not made in the US.
Yeah.
just when you look at the aesthetic, you can instantly see this is not a US city where they've made this movie.
Yeah. In fact, that was one of the things. In the TV show, they had a bit where the kids went to Australia, and the reason is because the filming went over on this and like went into the TV shooting schedule.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
So, what was your familiarity? You said that Power Rangers is what got you into martial arts in the first place. So, talk a little bit about your history with this property.
Right. Basically, Power Rangers came to Scotland about probably about 3 or 4 months after it first launched in the US. Mm-hmm. Now there was kind of two in the UK. There was kind of two tiers of people who could see Power Rangers. If you were like me and you're lucky and you had satellite TV, you got it about a month, maybe 2 months after the States. But if you only had terrestrial television, it was maybe 6 months to 9 months behind the US. So there was initially a bit of confusion when this movie came out because the White Ranger was the leader of the Power Ranger team, whereas in a lot of the UK, he was still the Green Ranger from season 2. So it kind of caused who's this White Ranger? What's going on? You know, it kind of confused things a little bit. But I love the franchise. The thing that really drew me in was when I was a lot younger. I was so 93. I would have been 9 going on 10 when Power Rangers premiered. And when I was a bit younger, I loved Transformers. I still have a few on my shelf. But the Zords, to me, those were like the sort of the next evolution of Transformers. And I just thought those things look amazing. I want some of those. And then later on, I got into the martial arts thing. And I'd always been kind of interested in Japanese culture, and knowing that this was a Japanese show, basically translated for an American audience, I thought, here's a Japanese show that I can kind of get into. And the funny thing is, in subsequent years, I've watched the Japanese version, and it's nothing like what we saw back in the day. But it's intriguing to kind of look at the two of them as different products and see where they cross over and where they don't, you know?
Yeah, I was just rewatching. Netflix has the TV show The Toys That Made Us, and they did an episode on Power Rangers. And in preparation for this, I rewatched it last night, and it's really interesting how this concept kind of evolved, because it's interesting how much American influence is kind of there right from the start, even in the Japanese version, because originally, right, because of the success of the Godzilla films, Japan had done a lot of these, like, you know, kishi sci-fi stuff called tokusatsu. And when they started off with a superhero property called Kamen Rider, which was eventually Master Rider in the US, I think.
Yeah.
But one of the things is Stan Lee wanted to get in on this. So they had done a series, a team series called Super Sentai, and they had started talking to Stan Lee, and they had made a deal with Marvel. Toei and Marvel made a deal where Marvel could use Toei's some of their properties in their comics, and Toei could produce Japanese TV shows based on Marvel characters. So Marvel had taken a bunch of different like robots and stuff, and they had put them in a comic book called Shogun Warriors. And then Toei decided to do an adaptation of Spider-Man. And one of the things of the deal was they could use the properties, but there were no restrictions on the properties. They could use the properties in any way they wanted to. So Toei had a completely different take on Spider-Man, where instead of being nerdy high schooler Peter Parker, he was now a motorcyclist, and his father was a scientist, and he got injected with this spider serum by an alien from Planet Spider, and then he had a giant robot he had a giant spaceship that turned into a giant robot, and that was really the start of the giant robot thing. And Toei had been planning. And it was so successful, and Bandai, who had done a lot of Toei's work on creating the props and all that, and the vehicle designs and the weapon designs, they had so much success with the Leopardon was the name of the robot, that Toei decided, okay, well, you know what, we should continue this, and we should bring back the Sentai series, call it Super Sentai, and we'll give them these mechas now. And originally, their first one that they were going to adapt was called, I think it was Battle Fever J, but that was originally going to be a Captain America inspired show. Somewhere in the production, though, in the lead up to the production, they lost the rights. Like the Toei and Marvel deal ended, so they couldn't use Captain America anymore. But so then they just had, but it still had the basic influence of it. So it's funny because then eventually Battle Fever J led to, you know, Zoo Ranger and all that, which eventually got done, which is what Saban chose to adapt for Power Rangers. And in all of that, right? So you have, you know, America influencing Japan, and then the series coming back to America later on.
It's funny because when you think about it, Transformers went through a kind of similar process, because it was Japanese toys adapted into first a Marvel comic, then a cartoon.
That's right.
And then it ended up going back to Japan, and they ended up actually continuing after the American series ended with their own take on it, which was kind of a full circle, you know?
Yeah. So we're similar ages, because I had just turned 10 when Power Rangers debuted, and it was like nothing I had ever seen before at that time. And I wasn't a Transformers kid, but I was a Ninja Turtles kid. So that martial arts influence, that was what drew me to it more than the robots. And I had already been a fan of superheroes in general, like X-Men and Batman were on TV at the time. So I was fans of those. I was a fan of both of those at the time as well. And it was a weird time at least in my school, because a lot of kids my age, they were getting to the age where they're like starting to get a little bit more sophisticated and starting to look down on things that are more kiddie. So liking Power Rangers at my age level was like the thing it was like a sign that you were too immature or something. So I had to hide the fact that I was a Power Rangers fan when I was in school at the time.
Very much the same for me as well. It wasn't the cool thing. Funny you talk about the Spider-Man and the X-Men, because the way it was broadcast, it was a Saturday morning thing in the UK. So if you had satellite TV, you used to get like 10 a.m. was, I think they would re-show old G1 Transformers. Then on at 11 a.m. you would get either X-Men or Spider-Man. And then at 11:30 you'd get Power Rangers. So there was just this like 2-hour block of just my kind of television, you know?
Yeah. So did you ever have because I had a time when I kind of eventually dropped off, and I think it was when it got to Zeo, that was when I started to get, I was starting to get a little bit tired of it. and then it was Turbo was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, and that was when I completely dropped out of the franchise.
Yeah.
How about you? Do you have a time when you dropped out of it, or were you a fan of it all the way through?
No, same here. Turbo was what killed it for me. As soon as the last of the original team left, you know, once my main man Tommy left, I thought this doesn't feel like the same show anymore. You know.
Yeah.
It was a funny thing because if you look into the background of it, Turbo feels extremely kind of goofy and a major downgrade from Zeo, because Zeo was very mystical. It had a lot of elements of like Egyptian mythology. The Gold Ranger had a pyramid for a Zord, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it was very sort of, it felt grander and more spectacular in a number of ways than season 3 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers did. But then Turbo was this major downgrade, and the explanation for that, I've later found in subsequent years, is that the show in Japan was actually supposed to be a parody of previous seasons.
Oh, really? Wow.
It was not intended to be taken seriously, but not understanding the language, not understanding the nuances of Japanese comedy, Saban took it and tried to adapt it anyway. And that's why a lot of people, even fans who stuck with the show after that, they feel that that is the weakest of all, like the 23 seasons to date.
Yeah, and something they pointed out in the Toys That Made Us episode is that when the toys, because one of the big selling points of Power Rangers has always been the toy line. Like, I think this is probably one of the last vestiges of that 80s crass commercialization where the show basically only existed as a half-hour commercial to promote the toys. Yeah, and this was kind of like the last hurrah of that kind of like marketing tactic. It seems to have kind of faded out since then, and good actually, because it was, even though I bought all those toys, but looking back on it now, it's like that was really fucking manipulative. And but one of the things that happened, one of the reasons that Turbo had done so poorly was because the toys had done so poorly, because people had saw them, because before you had these Zords, right? You had them, they were animals that transformed into these humanoid robots, or they were, dinosaurs or mythological beasts or all these really cool things, But then you had these ones, and they were cars that transformed into robots. And it's like, well, if I want a car that transforms into a robot, I'll just go with Transformers. Yeah. So that was a big problem that the toy sellers had, and the toys just weren't really selling at this point. And plus, you had that weird thing where you had that little kid in it too. And I didn't see the Turbo movie, but I did see I started watching the first few episodes of the Turbo series, and I'm just like, oh God, this is terrible. This kid is just so annoying. And at that point, I was just like, I'm going to find something else to do now.
Yeah. And the fact that they kind of changed up the whole command center thing, getting rid of Zordon, getting rid of the original Alpha, it felt like a completely different show. And I realized what they were trying to do. Because the guys who had started in 93, like us, we were getting, by that point, we were coming on like 15, 16 years old.
Right.
And we were probably too old for it. So they were readjusting it to go for the younger demographic again.
Another problem,
it just didn't work.
Yeah, and another problem they had too was because the way that this was filmed, it's actually kind of brilliant how they had decided to put this together, because what they had done was they had taken the Japanese footage, the action footage, because they're all in masks and costumes the whole time anyway, so you never see their faces. So they took the Japanese action footage and they spliced it in with scenes of American actors, which has led to some kind of funny instances. Like, I remember, if you're watching the old series, you're always wondering, how come Rita's mouth never matches anything she's saying? Yeah. But also they had things like, I remember the Green Ranger's costume was the biggest offender of that, where he had, in the Japanese version, it was like this really cool, like really, smooth shield that he had on, and then it would change sometimes mid-scene to like this really crappy discount looking thing.
Yeah, the kind of gold foil thing.
Yeah. And it was because they didn't have the budget to reproduce that same one, so they had to make this crappy version instead.
The other interesting thing about that is if you watch, of course, if you remember the original Ranger team, the Yellow Ranger and the Pink Ranger were our two girls on the team.
That's right.
And yet, whenever they morphed into their Ranger form, the Pink Ranger was quite clearly could easily have been the same person in the costume, even though it wasn't, right? Same proportions, and had like the little sort of kind of skirt thing on her costume.
Yeah.
Right. Suddenly, the Yellow Ranger's shoulders looked a lot broader.
And suddenly her and she becomes flat chested all of a sudden.
Yeah,
too.
and you're like, yeah, that's because in Japan it was a guy. So
exactly. Yeah. I had always wondered about that as a kid. I'm like, how come Kimberly wears a skirt when she transforms, but Trini doesn't?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was another interesting little thing they had there. And so what had happened was because they had used the Zoo Ranger footage for the series for like the first 3 seasons, but in Japan they don't last that long. It's like each season is a different team and it's a different concept related to the Super Sentai. So they changed the cast, they changed the concept, and Saban was running out of Zoo Ranger footage, and he was having to shoot more and more stuff in America, and which was led to higher budgets. And so then what he decided to do was, well, let's just change it up. Let's just have do what they do in Japan. We'll change the cast out and everything, and that way we can keep using. We'll have plenty of footage that we can keep using. So that's when they did Zeo, and then Turbo, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, from a business standpoint, it makes sense. Although to me, it really did kind of ruin the continuity of the show.
Yeah.
From what I understand, they originally considered doing that at the start of season 2, but by that point, the movie was already into pre-production, and they realized that the costumes were iconic.
Yeah.
And they thought we can probably get away with changing the Zords, but we can't get away with changing up the costumes as well.
Right.
So that'd just be too much.
That's a good segue to talk about the movie. So what do you remember about the movie when it first came out?
Right. So I saw the movie in cinema in summer of '95, and it was, well, I think it would have been July. It was either June or July, because I remember I saw that, then a few weeks later I saw Mortal Kombat, which came out in August of that year. Yeah, it was a great experience just to see the Rangers on the big screen. But it was a bit jarring at first because, like you say, the costumes were different. I knew who the White Ranger was because I'd already seen that, I think about January of that year it premiered, the White Ranger block. But a lot of kids in the audience hadn't. So there was a lot of kind of confused murmuring when Tommy morphed into the White Ranger initially. It was, I mean, it was a movie marketed at kids, and it was clearly the majority of people in the audience were kids, but there was a few adults who seemed to be getting into it and appreciating the fun of it as well. There's a lot to be said for just sometimes going to the cinema and just enjoying a good, goofy action movie,
Right.
And to me, this is the epitome of, high production value, low story content, simplistic 90s action movie. That's what this is to me.
Yeah. I had a lot of the same things. We didn't have the problem with any confusion with Tommy, but I loved this movie when it came out. I thought the costumes were amazing. I thought the CGI Zords were incredible back then. Now though, I was watching it. I had rewatched this movie. I think maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. It came out on Netflix or something, and I had rewatched it then, and I'm like, oh, I remember this as being really good and being like a big upgrade from the TV show. And I watched it. I'm like, ooh, some of these things have not aged as well as I thought they would have. But it is interesting to look back at it because, especially at that time period, because this was 95. So like, this was actually this had pretty good production values for a superhero movie in that time period.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned I mentioned the Mortal Kombat movie. If you look at the CGI of the Zords and then you look at the CGI of the reptile character
Oh
in
god,
that movie.
that was another one that was
Again,
just terrible.
Does
Mhm.
not hold up in the present day, but
Right.
you can see it was clearly based off of the same tech at the
Yeah.
time. You know, and for me, that's the one thing that really dates the movie.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
I
same.
wish they'd gone practical with the Zords. I really do.
Yeah, there was this weird because CGI, that kind of CGI technology was such a new thing at the time, and they like every movie wanted to take advantage of it, even if it didn't really fit. So they had even Blade had it. Like the climatic scene of Blade has Deacon Frost turning into this kind of like blood monster thing, and it was like I remember looking at it at the time, it looked really cool, and that was in '98. And then going back and watching it now, it looks like, cartoon Jello or something.
Yeah.
Or even Spawn was another one that came out at around the same time too, because they had the CGI cape, which at the time looked amazing, but now looks terrible.
Yeah, that's a remake that I'm really looking forward to. Actually, I'd love to see what modern technology can do for Spawn. That was a really interesting one.
But overall, though, like even with the enhanced effects, I thought the suits were especially looked really good at the time. Like I liked the new like kind of armored look, and even me at I was 12 years old when this came out, I think, and I thought, oh, that's so much more practical, right? Obviously, it makes sense that they'd have armor. Although it is kind of interesting, I didn't realize this at the time, but they're only in the Ranger costumes for a very short time in this movie.
Yeah, it's like barely 15 minutes. They have their initial fight with the Ooze Men. Then they spend a good portion of the movie in their ninja costumes,
right? Which
are a forerunner to what was going to happen in season 3 of the show. And then you had the big Zord battle at the end where they're in their Ranger form, but it's not really about them at that point. It's about the Zords.
Right. They just teleport back and it's almost instantly they summon the Zords.
Yeah.
And there's no sort of like, this was because they'd already done the fights with the henchmen. They had done one at the quarry. They had done one with the ninja outfits. Then I guess at that point they figured, well, now we just got to go straight into the Zord action.
Yeah. And that ended up becoming the kind of formula for season 3 of the show as well. You would have like the sort of henchman fight, the disposable henchmen, the Tengu tribe. You would fight them with the ninja.
Well, it was the Tenga in the TV show because
that's right.
They had some copyright disputes. So because 20th Century Fox produced this, and so when they tried to do it on the TV show, Saban couldn't get the rights to use Tengu, so they had to use Tenga instead.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. So then you had they would fight the Tengas. Then the monster would show up and they would morph, and then it would escalate to a Zord battle. That became the kind of formula for season 3. And that's where, like you mentioned at the height of the show, where the movie comes into that weird sort of non-canon, but still using the same actors and characters. Because in season 3, they get the ninja powers in a completely different way.
I remember being really confused when that happened in the TV show, because I remember the movie had come out, between season 2 and season 3, I think. And when season 3 premiered, I had no idea why they weren't using the ninja stuff. Why were they still using the Thunder Zords, I think it was at that time. And then when they did the ninja story and they had like that weird ninja robot or whatever, and I'm just like, what is happening?
I mean, to me, again, I use the Transformers example. If you remember Transformers, the movie, same idea, set between season 2 and 3 of the show.
Yeah.
But that was, now, whatever you may think of season 3 of that show, it was flawlessly integrated with the movie. Literally, the last 30 seconds of the movie becomes the first 30 seconds of season 3, and they just go from there.
Or also in the case of the X-Files as well, another example at the time, right? The movie had taken place between seasons of the TV show, and what had happened in the movie was reflected in the TV show then. But so this was a really weird thing because it was the same actors, but it was completely different timeline, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of the changes I really liked, because looking back at the costumes now, they don't hold up so well, especially when you look at it from a more modern sensibility. They still do kind of look cheap in hindsight. But one of the changes I really liked that they made, and this is something I could never understand as a kid, was the toys always had their morphing animal or dinosaur or whatever. They always had that symbol on their chest. The TV show never had that, and then the movie put that in.
Yeah, that was a good addition. Of course, the one exception to that being the White Ranger. He had
he had the weird symbol on it instead, which is also because the White Ranger was actually from a completely different series, apparently.
Yeah, which is why in the Japanese footage he never appears in the same scenes as the rest of the team. Yeah, that looking back on it now, that is why in season 2 so many times he would split off and go and have a one-on-one with another monster while the rest of the team were taking care of business.
Yeah. And also why his helmet is different, why his outfit is completely different from everybody else. And it was a real weird way that you got to hand it to him for the creative editing they did in it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, and I think that sorry, continue.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that it was also a bit of a marketing risk that they took there, because I don't know if it was the same in the States, but in Britain everybody loved the Green Ranger. He was the man.
Absolutely.
And even though you kept the same character, to change him up and give him a completely new power set, completely new costume, whatever, that was risky. It's again using the example of Transformers. Your season 3 Hot Rod and Ultra Magnus did not sell as well as Optimus Prime and Megatron, because they were not anywhere near as iconic. And I think there was a risk that the White Ranger wouldn't take as well as the Green Ranger had. But in the end, I think because the Tommy character was still there, I think fans eventually, they embraced it. And the Zords were awesome, to be fair. The season 2 Zords are probably my favorite ones.
They were really good, and I think that has kind of stayed, because even in the Power Rangers comics that Boom Studios does, they brought him back as the Green Ranger, and I think that stuck for a good long while in that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that in the Power Rangers PS4 game, Battle for the Grid, which is based off of those comics. There only are. I think it's only, as in terms of Mighty Morphin, there is only the Green Ranger and the Red Ranger are the two that made the cut as on the main character roster. And you can unlock a skin to play as the White Ranger, but it's clearly that the character is the Green Ranger if you play through the story mode and whatever.
Right. So what were some thoughts of yours rewatching this movie now, like over 20 years later after the fact, 30 years now, Jesus.
Yeah. The thing is that you have to watch it from the perspective of, this is a kid's show, but I'm not a kid anymore. You know? And I rewatched the TV show back during the summer there, because obviously with our current situation, I couldn't travel anywhere during summer, so I'd mostly stayed at home and watch movies and stuff. So I ended up doing a rewatch of the Power Rangers, and the movie really, to me, it still has the charm. Doesn't have the effects, doesn't have the aesthetic, as we as we said, the costumes don't quite hold up. The Zord battle looks like a PlayStation 1 video game.
And I think even that would be generous.
Yeah. And it's those, but you have to just kind of get past that and look at, and if you're a fan, you look for things to like in a movie. I mean, Paul Freeman as a villain, he's always watchable. He brought the same energy and the same literal sliminess to Ivan Ooze that he brought to Belloc in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The guy just he's he's one of those go-to actors that you can always depend on to deliver a good, intimidating villain. You know,
I think it kind of works against the favor of the movie though, because Paul Freeman is so clearly outclassing everybody else in this movie.
True.
I mean,
very true.
And it's like you're almost rooting for Ivan Ooze because he's so much more watchable than everybody else, and he has so much more personality than the rest of than the actual heroes do.
Yeah. And the funny thing about that is that that is something that's almost a kind of a trope that I think has emerged in modern superhero movies as well. Like 9 times out of 10, the villain is just as, if not more, compelling than the hero.
I think it was probably an argument could be made for Superman the movie and Gene Hackman's Luthor, but I think it was Jack Nicholson and Batman that really started that trend, because ever since then it's always been the villain has overshadowed the hero. Like you had Nicholson in Batman, you had Danny DeVito and Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns. After this one, in Batman Forever, you had Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Batman and Robin. So yeah, there has been this trend for a long time. And then it kind of stopped after Batman and Robin for a while, but it is starting to come back, with Tom Hiddleston and Michael B. Jordan and those types of guys.
Yeah. I mean, actually, for me, you might disagree, but an earlier example of that for me was the original Highlander movie.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, the Clancy Brown as the Kurgan, he just totally steals every scene that he's in that movie.
Yeah, I mean, and Clancy Brown is just amazing in everything. And he, it's funny though, but he wasn't really a big name at that time. So I think, but in terms of big name actors, I think it was that really started with Batman, I think.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And
it is. Yeah, that was my biggest problem rewatching, because I could deal with a lot of the cheesiness. One of the things I kept finding myself doing in my head was comparing it to the first Ninja Turtles movie, because both of them have kind of like a similar type of vibe where it's this superhero martial arts thing. It's supposed to be for kids, whereas Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it really did a good job of finding a way to kind of please all audiences. It was fun for the kids, but adults could enjoy it too. We covered that, back in one of the earlier episodes of this show, and my late co-host had he was an older guy, so he didn't grow up with like Ninja Turtles, right? He was already an adult when that came out, so he didn't have any of that association, that nostalgia association that I had with it. But even still, when we watched that movie, he really enjoyed it. I don't think he would have enjoyed Power Rangers as much, right? I think this is something that it's got such a nostalgia factor, and you had to have been a kid at the time to have really enjoyed it, I think.
Yeah, I think that, like you say, I think guys out with our immediate generation, if you didn't enjoy the show as a kid, I think you're probably not going to enjoy the movie. Yeah, because it's a to me, it's the same as like when I watch old episodes of Star Trek Next Generation. You almost feel as if you're checking in with old friends whenever you watch one of these episodes, or this movie. And it's interesting that you bring up the comparison with Turtles, because the Ninja Turtles movie, I agree with you. They really got the balance between action, humor, and just the right level of dark.
Yeah.
Shredder as a villain is so much more sinister than anything the Power Rangers would do.
Absolutely, yeah.
They kind of tried to do that with Lord Zed when they first brought him in, but apparently a lot of parents complained that he was too scary.
Exactly, yeah. And so then they kind of made him goofier after that.
Yeah, which is a shame, because that first sort of 20 to 30 episodes of Zed being full on evil, he was a great villain.
Oh yeah, and at the time, when that first even now that stands out to me, is that first reveal of Lord Zed with the chair turning and him just like, I'm just like, oh my God, this guy looks badass as hell.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, and it would have been nice if they had kept something like that. Although they did there's a little bit of that here, at least in the design. I really like the kind of like more detailed design they used for Zed in this movie.
Yeah, actually, I don't watch it anymore, but in the current season of Power Rangers, they have apparently brought Lord Zed back.
Oh, okay.
And I'm kind of disappointed that they went with the TV show design rather than the movie design, because the movie design does look so much more intimidating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, the one thing that stands out to me, especially when you're talking about the Turtles comparison, is that the Turtles each had clear individual personalities. Apparently my daughter agrees with me. But they had such individual personalities, and that's really what makes that movie stand out even more. Like even the effects are still great. Like they still work really well, those practical suits and the puppetry they had used. But another thing too is like it's hard to forgive a lot of it with the Turtles, with the Power Rangers, especially because watching this movie and watching the scenes of them on Phaedos or when then they're hanging out together, they just have no personality. Like none of these characters really stands out.
No, they're all basically color-coded templates of each other.
Yeah.
It's like generic teenager number one, generic teenager number two, you know.
I think the only one who comes close is probably Kimberly, and that's because Amy Jo Johnson is probably the only actor in the bunch, and she's the only one who had an actual acting career after this show.
Yeah, I think that's very true. If you think that Paul Freeman is exponentially above everybody else in the movie, I think Amy Jo is definitely a cut above the rest of the Ranger team.
It also brought back some memories because I had such a crush on her when I was a kid.
I think we all did, my friend. I think we all did.
So that definitely brought back some memories.
It
was also real weird that they had this new guy in the villain, because they had brought back Zed and Rita and Goldar, but they didn't have the other, like, what was it, Babu and Squat, the two bumbling guys, or the monster maker whose name I forget.
Finster,
Finster, that was it, And but those guys were all gone. They weren't in this, but they had this new pig-like guy named Mordant, who was never seen from again after this. And I thought that was really weird. The entire time I'm wondering, when I was a kid, I was wondering, like, who the hell even is this guy?
You know, if there's anybody listening out there who has a Mordant figure in good condition, they are worth quite a lot now, because that figure was on the market for such a short time. He was only available basically during the marketing period of the movie, which was about a sort of 3-month window.
And I'm guessing he sold for shit too. Which is why they probably didn't keep him in production.
Yeah, probably. I mean, he was definitely not a very memorable or particularly charismatic character. I really don't. It's one of them. You think, why did they do that? Because you could literally have just had Goldar there, and that was
exactly that
would have been needed.
It was. Apparently, there were some budgetary reasons or something. One of the interesting things I found out when I was doing some research in this is that the crew involved in this, like the director and the writer and all that, they had never seen the TV show before they got this show. And then they had done kind of like, so what it says here is they had done kind of like a fast forward watch of the TV show.
Interesting.
And in fact, they were originally, because there are going to be some more changes. Like they had originally did not want to have the total face covering for the masks, for the helmets. And so initial shooting had the actors in helmets, but there were no visors on the helmets. And then they realized afterwards, that was a mistake. So then they went back and they reshot it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because again, that is a recurring problem with masked heroes, particularly if you watch the Spider-Man movies. There's always some excuse where his mask has to get ripped at some point so that the actor can emote, you know?
Yeah, Iron Man had got around to that in a really clever way by having the scene, the close-ups of Robert Downey's face in the suit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was how they gotten around it. Because there was talk about doing Iron Man for a while. It's like, well, how are we going to do Iron Man when his face is covered all the time? But even with other heroes too, like you see in the Captain America movies, every time he's got a scene where his mask gets pulled off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, funnily enough, the only one who I think doesn't really do that is Batman.
Yeah, well, I think a big part of that is because his eyes and his mouth are visible, so it's a lot easier to still kind of emote.
Yeah.
In the case of Captain America, I just think it's, the producers are probably like, look, we paid for Chris Evans' face. We got to show Chris Evans' face.
Very true.
I mean,
yeah.
nobody's going to see the Batman movies for Michael Keaton's face. As nice, as good of an actor as it is, they're not as interested in his face as they are as his talent.
No, definitely not. So yeah, so with this movie as well, though, I think the whole traveling to Thanos to get their new powers, that part of the movie kind of drags a little bit for me.
Yeah, same here. I felt the same thing. I found myself looking at my phone a lot during those parts.
Yeah. I mean, I really do like the ninja costumes. I think those, because they're not they're just basically suits rather than full-on costumes, and they kind of the costumes in that respect still hold up for me. I think they still look good, and they're bright and colorful, and I definitely the following months after that, I made a point of buying all the Ninja Ranger figures because I thought they looked awesome.
Yeah, I had too. Those costumes look really good. They still do hold up a lot better than the actual Ranger suits do. But the whole Thanos thing, one thing I found was really strange is they're on an alien world, but the spirit animals are all from Earth. and the animals they're all conveniently fit these Rangers spirit animals exactly. Because so I thought looking back, I'm just like, wait a second, some of this stuff. Also, I remember that one scene when Tommy does his ninja corkscrew kick. I'm like, you've never trained in these things before. How do you already have a special move prepared for it?
Yeah. It's like you do, again, like I said, good, goofy action movie. You've got to just switch your brain off and enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah. Also, I thought the little kid in this movie, Fred, this kid annoyed the shit out of me. I mean, even when I first watched this movie, I thought, why the hell is this little brat in the movie?
Yeah. It again, trope of movies of that time. You always had to have the irritating 12-year-old kid who somehow saves the day.
Yeah.
I think that all kind of started with Wesley Crusher, didn't it?
I'm not sure which came out. It might have been Short Round, I think, in Temple of Doom.
Oh, actually, yeah, you're right. Yeah, because that was a couple of years early.
Yeah. Although Short Round was nowhere near as annoying as most of the kids' sidekicks are.
No, definitely not. Yeah, and I do kind of feel sorry for Will Wheaton because he still gets ribbed about that to this day, and he was just working with what he was given,
Although interestingly, who they originally who's up for the part of Fred in this movie?
No, who was that?
Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a way to make you feel old. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was old enough to fit that part at that time.
Oh my God. Wow, imagine if he'd have got that. That could have really changed things up.
Yeah. But yeah, the Zord fight, though, that is still the one thing that I can forgive a lot of stuff in this movie, but that the CGI used in the big Zord fight is just so bad. And when they merge into the Megazord, the Ninja Megazord, it just looks incomprehensible.
Yeah. That was a thing, something which really kind of annoyed me about the more recent, the 2017 Power Rangers movie as well, was that the Megazord is supposed to look like a humanoid robot.
Mhm.
you know. And in both cases, to me, it didn't. It just looked like this giant sort of walking tank kind of thing, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked the reboot movie, but I did not like the design of the Megazord in that.
No. Yeah, the reboot movie is maybe something we'll discuss on a future show, but I did not care for that movie at all. I'm afraid. I really it actively annoyed me in a lot of places.
Really? See, for me, it had solved a lot of the problems I had with this movie, where it was sufficiently. I thought it was still sufficiently like kid friendly, but it also it had some darkness to it, and it had the characters had individual personalities, which is something I felt that this one really lacked. And God, Elizabeth Banks chewing all the scenery in sight was just so much fun to watch for me.
Well, again, it's all about the charismatic, over the top villain, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a shame that movie never got a sequel, because although I don't like that movie personally, I saw enough in it that I thought there's things they could develop here, you know.
But one of the things I thought that, and I like that what it did is that it did kind of make an attempt to kind of grow up the franchise, but it didn't go to the extreme that the Power Rangers fan film from several years back went to.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
That was just way too much.
It was so mean-spirited.
Yeah,
you know? That's a thing about modern superhero cinema in general that I don't like, right? Like I'm gonna say something that might upset a lot of your listeners here, but it's just my opinion, right?
Go for it.
I do not like The Dark Knight.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right? I do not like The Dark Knight at all. For me, it is a 2.5-hour essay on misery and depression, right? And to me, I want to come when I go and watch a superhero movie, like the Power Rangers, I want to come out of the movie feeling, yes, the good guys kicked ass, we won. I'm elated, you know. Came out of The Dark Knight feeling like I wanted to go and hang myself. It was such a depressing movie, you know.
See, I don't have that problem with The Dark Knight, but I did feel that way after Batman v Superman. Like that was just unrelentingly dark, and like the Snyder stuff in general is just I utterly despise it. And for a lot of the same reasons you say. So Dark Knight I think that kind of, for me at least, that kind of skirted the line. It hasn't held up as well in my estimation. Like, I don't think it's as amazing. When I rewatch it, I don't think it's as amazing as I did when I first saw it. The holes kind of come through a little bit more now, but it's still, it doesn't have that same utterly bleak feeling that that Batman v Superman left me with.
Yeah, Batman v Superman was what I would say in that movie's defense, though. We're getting a bit off topic here, but humor me. If you watch that and then watch the Snyder cut of Justice League kind of back to back, it works as a complete narrative so much better.
Oh, it does.
Than the 2017 Justice League. Because the 2017 Justice League is just, it's almost like Power Rangers in a sense. It's just like throw in all the characters, but don't really develop any of them. Have a big over-the-top villain, but let's not animate him properly, you know, and it all just kind of goes downhill from there, you know.
Yeah, one thing I will say in defense of the Whedon cut of Justice League is that they actually got Superman right in that one. So he actually feels like Superman in that one, whereas in the Snyder cut, he's back to maiming people. And so even though it's a total mess, it's a total Frankenstein, as another guest, Adam Garcia, had said before, I forgive a lot of it just because it got Superman right. And it gave Henry Cavill, even bad CG lip and all, Henry Cavill got a chance to play Superman the way he's supposed to be played. He was charming, he was kind, but he wasn't just like relentlessly depressing or violent all the time. So I forgive that version of Justice League just for that, because at least it gave me that Superman on the big screen.
I would completely agree with that, because it's like we toddled around for 2.5 movies, then we finally got the Superman that I went to the cinema to see originally when Man of Steel came out. You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
But anyway, back to Power Rangers.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the Zord battle, I did like I liked the idea of how they brought the comet into it at the end for the climax. I thought that was that actually showed quite good creativity, because as soon as because in the show it was always the power sword that took down the monster, right? 30 seconds into this Zord fight, the power sword gets wrecked, and you're like, oh god, what are they going to do now? They don't have a power sword.
Yeah.
They don't have the Deus Ex Machina to take out the villain like they do every week.
Which always made you wonder why none of the villains had ever thought maybe we should find a way to counter the power sword.
Yeah.
This keeps happening all the time. You'd think we should do something about that.
See, Goldar was the smart one. As soon as that power sword showed up, he was out of there, you know. But
no,
yeah,
you're right. That was a clever usage. Another thing I think that I liked about it is we actually saw how they were piloting the Zords, because that always kind of maybe I was always wondering, like, where the hell are the cockpits in these things in the TV show? Because it's never clear, right? It's always just like this clear image of the cockpit, but you don't see where it is in relation to the Zord. Here they showed it, like they had zoom ins on them in the cockpits and all that. So I really liked that aspect of it.
Nice little throwback as well when they first get into their Zords and Kimberly says, "Nice stereo." Because that was the same line that she used when she got into her first Zord in episode 1 of the TV show.
Yeah.
And I actually did wonder with the Zords. I noticed what I thought was a Superman the movie reference in there.
Oh, really? What was that?
When the monorail is out and Tommy pilots the Falcons.
Oh, right. Yeah.
To complete the train line.
Yeah.
So the kids can go over. I just went straight back to Superman doing that with the express train.
That was another good thing too, in that, you know, it shows them actually, and this was a big problem I had with Man of Steel, is that it shows them actually saving people, which you never really saw on the TV show.
Yeah. And again, it showed you that there was clearly, while you can say that the story is weak, the characters are formulaic, whatever, there was clearly some thought and some quite good writing went into different aspects of this movie.
Yeah.
You know, you can definitely see where creativity has come in, because I don't know if that was intended as a Superman homage, but that was how I read it. You know, even back in '95, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember Superman doing that. You know,
I mean, I think it had to have been. I don't. It's way too similar for it not to have been a Superman homage, I think.
Yeah. And then the whole, again, it's that thing of like not quite adult humor, but something that adults will find funny. You know, the when they basically knee Ivan Ooze in the balls to send him in front of the comet. You know,
the thing I found so funny about that is that it was for emergency use only, to use the ball strike.
There's a specific ball breaker button on the Megazord. Yeah.
Oh, that was another thing I thought was kind of weird was the fact that Ivan Ooze's plan to unearth his robots. I couldn't understand why he needed the parents to do it when he can create these these bruisers out of ooze himself. So I never really quite understood why he needed them to do it. And another thing I thought was weird was, well, I do remember too, there's this one, when all the parents are mind controlled and they're walking out, there's this one lady in the crowd who is like dressed in the most ridiculous outfit ever. I'm watching it last night with my wife and I'm just like, what is she wearing? I'm not sure if you caught that, but it was just,
there was a few extras who I think didn't quite take the direction they were supposed to in that scene. There's a couple of people walking the wrong way if you watch it as well.
But also there's another part too, in that he's the scene when he's in the quarry with Goldar and he says, he's like, we have to get them unearthed. He's like, I wish they would work faster. And then he stops one of them from working to do the dancing.
Yeah. Yeah, again, classic villain trope. Stay on task, man. Don't monologue. Stay on task. Oh, yeah. But I think we can both agree that Ivan Ooze is definitely the highlight of this movie, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, Paul Freeman he steals every scene he's in. He's the most entertaining thing about this movie.
Yeah, but, overall, I still think it's a good movie. It's one that, it's one that if I could find a Japanese subtitle version of it, I wouldn't hesitate to show to my students. I think because we usually do that in my school job at Christmas time. We'll watch a movie.
Okay.
Usually Home Alone, because the kids love Home Alone.
Oh God.
But we're gonna. I was thinking I might try and see if I can get an old Japanese Blu-ray of Power Rangers and maybe show them it just to see what they think of it.
You might be able to find if you have a downloaded version of it, you might be able to find it on like iTunes or something like that. Or you might be able to find. Sometimes they have Japanese subtitles floating around on the internet, so you might be able to find something like that. That's because I have my entire. I had ripped my entire movie library and I run it through Plex on my home sharing, and a lot of these movies I have, right, they were American DVDs. They don't have Japanese subtitles, and but what Plex has, they have a subtitle search option. So even if there's something that doesn't have Japanese subtitles for my wife, I can search, and about like 60-70% of the time there'll be a Japanese subtitle option that we can find.
All right, I'll need to look into that. That's interesting.
For me, I think if you were a fan of Power Rangers, I think if you were a fan of Power Rangers, I don't see any reason why you haven't seen this movie already, because but if you were, or if you've only discovered it recently, like through the comic book or something like that, then it might be worth a watch. I'd say if you don't really have that kind of, if the Power Rangers doesn't really tickle that nostalgia bone for you, I don't think you would enjoy this movie.
I would say that. I would agree, but I would add the caveat that if you're one of those guys like me who watches superhero movies for the great villain performances, I think it's almost worth watching just for Ivan Ooze.
Yeah, that I would agree with that. It comes very close to almost being worth it just for him alone.
Yeah, he's up there with. It's like you say, when you've got an actor of his caliber surrounded by a bunch of pretty much non-actors, it perhaps makes him look better than he is. But in Paul Freeman's case, I don't believe that. I genuinely think he was just such a superb actor who played that role. And the thing is, you can tell he's having so much fun with it. Yeah,
he definitely gets the award for how the hell did this guy end up in this movie?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's like Patrick Stewart and Ted, right? You're like, why are you in this?
Although it was quite funny to hear Patrick Stewart swearing. I never actually.
I thought it was hilarious. But it's like you're watching it, and like Shakespearean trained thespian Patrick Stewart, and he's doing dick joke voiceovers.
Yeah.
Or Alan Rickman in Dogma is another one where it's just like, I don't understand how you're in this when you should be doing something else.
Yeah, it's. And
not a knock to those movies. I love those movies, but it's just like they don't seem like a good fit at all.
But I actually have a lot of respect for actors who are willing to, in a sense, lower themselves to that. They're not beyond self-parody.
Exactly. Same here.
They're not beyond having a joke at themselves. And clearly, Paul Freeman knew this was just some goofy kids movie.
Oh yeah,
and yet he flew into it head first, and he really went for it.
And he committed, because he had to do and he wasn't half-assing it. Like he had to do 7 hours of makeup a day for this. Compare that to like Jennifer Lawrence in the X-Men movies, where she had to suddenly develop an allergy to the makeup all of a sudden.
Yeah. No, there's definitely there's a greater there's a you got to admire the commitment of some of these actors, even if you don't necessarily appreciate the movies, you know.
Well, I will
I
say
mean-
that too, especially about Jason David Frank. Like he is remained so maybe it's because there's not a whole lot of other stuff for him to do, but he really seems to really love like this franchise, which is why he stayed involved in it so much over the years.
Yeah, do you know it's funny? I've actually got a signed print from him up on my wall.
Oh, yeah?
Which my brother got me at a Comic Con in Scotland a couple of years ago. Yeah. He's a great ambassador for the franchise as well. He not because from what I've been reading about it, not only did he basically start the whole thing of like, you know, going to Comic Cons and meeting fans and tapping into that nostalgia, but he also brought other actors from the show and from that era into all that.
Yeah.
And encouraged them because a lot of them had moved on and not even, you know, they weren't even actors anymore. Some of them had become like, you know, teachers or instructors.
Yeah, I remember
you know.
I'd seen some documentary. I think it was the guy who played Jason, Brian Austin Green, I think is his name.
Austin St. John.
Brian Austin Green is another actor. I always get those two names mixed up. Austin St. John. Yeah, he was like a firefighter for a while, and apparently I think he was even in Afghanistan too.
Yeah, he was a firefighter, paramedic.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you say, he did his bit for the military as well. And
the guy who played Zach, Walter Jones, I think. He had become like an instructor. Like Tai Bo was basically originally his thing. He had called it hip hop keto back in the day.
Yep, I remember that.
And David Yost, who had played Billy, that was a tragic story for him because he quit because like the production crew kept harassing him about being gay.
Yeah.
And he apparently wasn't the actors. Apparently the other actors had actually been supportive of him and he had good relationships with them. But like the other actors would be pulled in by the producers and they'd be asked about his sexuality all the time. And he had just gotten so tired of it that he had quit and it had been such a destructive environment for him that he had tried conversion therapy. Right.
Yeah.
And it almost drove him to suicide. And it was, you know, it's terrible. And since then, like he had come out of it and he'd become like a producer. He strangely enough, he was one of the producers on Temptation Island, which was this reality TV show a few years back which like the complete as far away from Power Rangers as you could possibly get. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, he has in recent years started doing the convention circuit again as well.
Yeah.
And from my understanding, it was Jason Frank that brought him into it. Which you got to say, props to that guy because from what I understand, having read about him, he's a conservative. He he likes his guns and whatever, but it didn't stop him from having a very good friendship and helping out a guy who he knew was gay, you know, which just shows that you don't have to necessarily be a bigot to be a conservative, you know. So
right.
I'm not going to agree with the guy politically, but I certainly respect him for doing that, you know.
Yeah. And then and unfortunately Tui Trang never she was on her way to having some decent Hollywood performances because she was in the second Crow movie and she did a pretty good job in that, but then she had died in a car accident I think before even that movie was released.
Yeah, I think she was only 27, 28,
something like that. Yeah,
really tragic. Yeah. I actually, funny thing, I was an odd kid that way because everybody was crushing on the Pink Ranger, and Kimberly was gorgeous, but Trini was my girl. Trini was the one I had the hots for back in the day.
Now you had said one last thing I wanted to ask about before we close up is you had said you had watched some of the Japanese ones and just like how different they. How do they compare? Like what did you think of the Japanese ones?
Well, now remember, I'm coming at this as someone who's, you know, as of yesterday lived in Japan for 15 years. So I can appreciate a lot of the cultural nuances and the like why people act a certain way as they do in the show. It to someone from Europe or the US coming into it who has no prior knowledge of Japanese sort of culture or how the Japanese approach TV, they would think it was over the top, melodramatic, and kind of dumb. But I actually really enjoyed it. I mean, one of the things was like the relationship between the Red Ranger and the Green Ranger is completely different in the Japanese version.
Right.
They're actually brothers, and they are rivals. And initially, the reason the Green Ranger is a villain is because he feels inferior to his brother. And they have this kind of set to, but in the end up they make peace. And towards the end of the series, the Green Ranger actually, in our version, he just temporarily lost his powers.
Right.
In the Japanese version, he dies. I mean, they actually kill off the Green Ranger, which is really, unthinkable in the American version. And the other thing was that the villains were so much darker. Bandora, as she was known in Japan, Rita Repulsa, she full on makes a pact with the devil in order to defeat the Power Rangers.
Okay.
If you remember towards the end of season 1, what was originally supposed to be the finale of the series was a 2-part episode called Doomsday, where the Rangers fight Goldar and Cyclopsis Cyclopsis was Goldar's Zord, basically. Right. And then this mysterious head in the sky monster called Lokar shows up to back them up. And Lokar is just seen as exponentially more powerful than any other villain. And that's because in the Japanese version, Lokar literally was Satan.
Okay.
And so the Japanese series ended in a similar way with them taking down Cyclopsis and whatever, but they literally destroyed the avatar of Satan at the end of the series. And I thought that's a really, really dark path to go down for a kids' TV show. You're getting into Spawn territory at that point,
Yeah, I've been interested in seeing the original one, especially because I think if you use a VPN, some of those episodes are actually available for free on like the official Ranger homepage or whatever. So I've been curious to check that. I think I might just wait until my daughter's actually a little bit older and then probably watch it with her. Probably what I do.
They did actually release the complete Zyuranger series on, I think it was DVD a couple of years ago.
Well, I know it's out there because I have seen it at Sataya and stuff like that. But if with the VPN, if I could watch it, I can watch it for free by making the Ranger homepage think I'm in the US. That's a lot easier.
that is true.
Because then I don't have to dig up subtitles for it either.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Amazon has an English subbed version of it.
Oh, okay.
But it's quite expensive. I think it's something like 8,000 or 9,000 yen.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
Considering I only paid 4,000 yen for the boxed, the European box of seasons 1, 2, and 3, it's quite a lot to pay for one season.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. I would recommend that if you're a fan of the original and you want to see it done just a little bit differently. One thing though, the idea of Goldar and Scorpina being a couple is weird.
Oh yeah,
that's weird.
See, even as a kid, I knew something was up with that, right? Because I could tell, and then I found out later on that they were a couple in the original one. I'm like, oh, that makes total sense now.
Yeah.
One more thing
my thought was Scorpina, you're too beautiful. You could do much better than that, girl.
Yeah,
come on.
Jesus. Another thing too is the comic book. You've read the Boom Studios comics, right?
Yes, I have. Yeah, Shattered Grid is excellent.
So
really.
As someone who is, you done the rewatch of the TV show, you've read the comics. How do the comics compare to the TV show? Is it as like Kishi as a TV show, or does it find like a more updated balance?
It's definitely more updated, and it's gone. There is a little bit of that Dark Knight element in terms of making it darker and grittier to appeal to a more mature audience. Because whereas, the current TV series is, I watched one episode of it last week when I heard that Lord Zedd was coming back, just to see what was going on. And it was, in all honesty, it was barely watchable because it's aimed at 7-year-olds, right? That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
But the comics are clearly aimed at guys like us, guys who grew up with the original show and would like to see a continuation of stories about those characters, but with a more mature twist.
Yeah.
And the Boom Studios actually strike the balance very well, I think, in that there's nothing in there there's no gratuitous sex or violence or anything. So kids who are watching Power Rangers now could still pick up these comics and enjoy them.
Right. So it's not like the fan film.
No, not at all. Not at all. But there's higher stakes. Sometimes people get killed. It's on the same level as, like, I would say a Spider-Man or a Superman comic.
Okay.
Right.
I've been meaning to check it out, but unfortunately it's first I have to use my VPN anytime I look for it on Comixology, because the way the rights work is Saban has the rights to the Super Sentai stuff everywhere except Asia.
Yes.
So like if I change my VPN, set it to the US, the Boom Studio stuff comes up on Comixology right away. If I don't have my VPN on, then it doesn't show up at all.
Yeah. I've had similar issues trying to watch a couple of different things that were, the rights issues and what have you. But I would also just say that I don't know if you know about this, but Saban have said, I think it's now Hasbro actually that owns Power Rangers.
Yeah, Saban sold it to Hasbro a few years back.
And they've said that this current iteration will be the last time that they use Japanese footage.
That's right. Yeah, I was reading last night that they've got someone who is like doing like a whole kind of imagining like a new like kind of reboot universe for the Power Rangers, for like everything, for like films, for TV, and he's kind of like mapping it all out. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, and one of the rumors is that they are going to do a more adult centric TV series. Right.
That's what I've read too.
Now, I'm not going to spoil it for people that haven't read it, but all I'll say is if they do that and they do not make Lord Draken the main villain, that is unforgivable. Because Lord Draken is one of the best, most intimidating, but also at the same time, most kind of sympathetic villains I've ever read in a comic book. There are so many layers to the guy. He's a cold-blooded murderer. He's literally committed genocide, but at the same time, he's just Tommy the Green Ranger who took one wrong turn. Yeah, that's all the character is. One thing that happened to the Tommy in our universe didn't happen to him. He didn't have friends when he needed them, and that drove him to become this completely insane villain who literally kills everybody in his own universe and then starts hunting in our universe.
Yeah, I'd heard about that story, and that made me really interested in seeing, like, and going back and looking into this series. And I've just been waiting for it to actually come on sale on Comixology so I can pick up the books.
Yeah.
But so when that happens, then I'm hopefully, because the problem is Boom, because Comixology has lots of sales. Marvel and DC run sales on there constantly. Boom almost never runs sales, and when they do, they're not really that impressive, right? It's like it's like $1 or $2 cheaper than what it normally is. So I haven't really been willing to kind of spend the money on it yet, but maybe once I finish off my massive to read pile, I'll eventually get there.
I remember that used to be an issue with the Transformers IDW comics back in the day as well. They were always that bit more expensive, and I think it was simply because they were a more limited print run, with it being a smaller company.
Yeah, could be. I think with Yeah, that could be it. And then with the digital stuff, they're trying to price match it. So
Yeah.
because I know that was an issue when digital first started coming out, was the fact that comic stores were worried that they'd be undercutting the print sales.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
intentionally, I think at first, in fact, the digital comics were intentionally more expensive than the print ones.
Mm.
That's changed now, and now digital is cheap, is the same price, except for when it's on sale. But anyway, I think that about does it for wraps up our discussion about Power Rangers. So Liam, anything you want to promote? Tell people where they can find you online.
Yeah, if you guys want to give me a follow on Twitter, it's at Liam6783. Always happy to engage with people. Would love to hear feedback on this, because this is my first time doing this kind of podcast, and I hope you'll have me back again sometime to talk about another movie, because I've really enjoyed going through this.
Absolutely, yeah. You
Yeah.
gave me a short little list, so we'll have to look at that again and see what's on there.
Yeah. I definitely I someday I want to make the case for the defense for Superman 4. That is not as bad a movie as everybody says it is, and I'll fight to the death on that one.
All right, maybe we'll have to have you come on for that then. All right. Well, Liam, thanks so much for coming on, and yeah, we'll definitely have you back on, and we'll have that fight at some point.
Look forward to it, mate. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. And you can find us at superheroceinephiles.com, on Twitter and Instagram at Super Cinema Pod. Don't forget to join our Facebook group, Superhero Cinephiles. Just do a search of that. It'll pop right up. And please, if you like what you hear, leave us a review. Let us know what you think. And if you're interested in being on the show, you can drop me a line. superherocinephiles@gmail.com is the email address, or we've got a contact form on the website. Drop me a line. Let me know what you'd like to talk about, and we'll see if we can schedule a time to squeeze you in. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Super Cinema Pod. Join our Facebook group by searching for Superhero Cinephiles, where you can interact with us and other superhero fans. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a regular supporter at Patreon or make a one-time donation through PayPal, both of which can be found at our website, superherocinephiles.com. If you buy or rent any movies through the Amazon links at our site, it helps support the show. Please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.